Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Chat with Charles. I have my guest, BCRICH581 here. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, and happy Cinco de Mayo for those of you who celebrate, which I'm one. So welcome, and I am so happy to be here.
Cinco de Mayo, that's great. The Battle of Puebla.
Yes, you know the background. Few do. Very good.
Yeah, what happens when you marry a Mexican? So
That would okay. That would explain.
and you live in Texas, and
and you learn to hate the French. All
there
the
you go.
things.
That's right. The interesting thing about it is, so many people, even here in Texas, think it is Mexican Independence Day, which it is not.
It's like September or August,
right? September 17th or something like that. Yeah,
I have a webinar that has a woman in there who lives in I can't think of where she is. Guadalajara. She's from Guadalajara. And she worked in the U.S. for a few years, and she just looks at Cinco de Mayo with contempt, and she's like, it's all these Americans who used to be Mexican pretending they're Mexican, and it's a holiday and she doesn't know the American holiday. She's like, in Mexico, it's like that tree holiday that you have. It's like Arbor Day. And she's like, yeah, Cinco de Mayo is like Arbor Day.
Oh yeah, most people in Mexico do not celebrate Cinco de Mayo. It is really just a Puebla thing. Yeah. In since it's just been co-opted as, drinking margaritas and eating tacos, so.
Yeah.
That's not what we're here for.
That's not what we're here to discuss today. No. So, sorry. Apologies.
We are here to talk about the guitar journey and bass journey of BCRICH581. But before we get into all that, let's go ahead and see who we have with us, because we have quite the crowd coming in here. The interesting thing, at midnight, 2 minutes after midnight, Trev was in saying, is it too early?
I don't know. Is it too early?
Yeah, I don't know. That's interpretation. So we have R2R3 Locking Nut in the chat, wishing everybody a happy Cinco de Mayo. We have Herb of Fireside Studio, who is wishing us a good show, but he is still at the M3 Rock Festival, having a great time. If you've been watching him on Facebook, he's been putting up some good some good shots. Maybe we'll get some content out of it too, as well, on his channel. So that'd be cool.
That would.
And we've got Terry 3Gs. He is here and listening, but he's doing stuff as he moves around the house. We have Keith H saying good morning to everybody. And Corey's Garden, you gotta love it. Yabba dabba doo. Good morning to all of you. And that guy Ben Coombs is in the chat saying hello to you and me. So,
prepping for the evening festivities, I'm sure, over on Ben's channel.
For sure. And Rob, you have made the big time, because Charles Green is in watching you on Chat with Charles.
Wow, I am honored. And Charles has a fabric wrap project, does he not? I thought
we are finishing up his fabric wrap guitar, and he's being very patient. But I want it to be perfect, and I have not had time lately to work on it, and so I owe him a conversation, I think.
You are a craftsman and an artist. The creative process, it has to flow. It has to be organic.
Here you go. Thank you. I appreciate that. So, Charles, I'm gonna give you a call later today sometime, I think, if you're available. Wayne McConnell, welcome in. And Ben is saying he's had his pre-noon cold snack, and he has been followed in by Ryan of OU812. And let's see who else. Yep. Wayne has got his coffee and weed all set.
All right.
And it's our crowd. What can I say?
It is indeed our people. It is our tribe. Yes. We love them dearly. That's what they do.
And Bonkers has made his way in. Good morning, sir. And for Ben, he is making a slight adjustment to Wayne. He's like, tea and weed. Okay.
In honor of the Queen.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so Ben is saying he's guessing we won't see Triv live in the chat since he was out every night. And welcome in Stephen Monchmaselli. He's saying good afternoon. He's still moving stuff in and out again today. So, all right. Well, glad for you to join us. And Charles Green just wants to let you know that BCCRICH581 rocks.
We do our best. By we, I mean me. I don't know why I said we.
And Trev just wants to make it known he is listening from bed, Mr. Coombs. He's listening from bed. And Paul McNeary and all the cats are in the chat.
Oh, and got a cat here. Hello. Okay.
There you go. You brought a co-host.
I brought my co-host, yes, Clyde, the world's angriest, oldest cat.
There you go. And JP Page 2 saying hello to all the peeps. And on the West Coast, Hit Metalworks as well. Saying good morning and to both of us. And Hobo Roadie has made it in, and he says the 8th of January, similarly asymmetrical slaughter is the 5th of May, and the British don't get to have or win a rematch. Better choice for a party, though.
That's an interesting take.
There you go. And joined by Blackjack Guitar saying good morning to both of us. And Michael Lepensi has put down a guitar for 5 minutes, and he is here to say hello.
Hello.
He does a great show where he'll be on for hours just playing, and it's just, and you can come and go, and it's a lot of fun. So I love it. Let's see. I think now they're all starting just to talk to each other. Yeah, because that catches us up with the chat.
All right.
So we start with the obligatory question. Okay, Rob, how did you get started on your guitar journey?
So for whatever reason, the little kind of clique of kids in one of the streets I kind of hung out with that my friend lived on, like everybody on that street played guitar. And some of them were really quite good. A lot of them still play. One of them was phenomenally good, actually, who sadly passed away in Afghanistan a few years ago. But I grew up around these guitar players, and they were, cousins and older brothers and whatever. And I kind of figured out I don't really need to be great on bass. I just need a bass. There's no shortage of guitar players, but I definitely see a market for bass players. And at this point, my life, and I should probably after the chat beat myself up and take my lunch money. My life was mainly role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that, So this is the mid 80s, and we're starting to get some rock songs that were really kind of guitar driven that came out. And I started listening to it and just talking to everybody's older brother guitar player or neighbor guitar player, and thought, if I'm even halfway decent at bass, I can find a gig. I'm sure I can. So pestered my mom, who was, just happy to channel me in a direction that didn't involve arson or vandalism. And got me a PV Foundation bass through a family friend who worked at a music store and had a studio. Still have it, a PV Foundation, a PV TKO 65 combo. I sold that, but got one back. If I had to do it all over again, I think I would have stuck with just that bass. I've got like 4 of them now because I'm not that bright. And collected a bunch. But I started out with that and just stuck with it. And I really kind of liked it. And I was fortunate having people around me that would tell me, at first I really listened to a lot of John Entwistle and all the rock guys. But my friends who were really serious guitar students would be like, start listening to these jazz players, and then I got into Weather Report and Jaco Pastorius, and that kept me kind of growing in the instrument and buying gear too. So that in a nutshell is how it began.
All right, so I got a question on that, because you said this in a conversation with me, the other day as well, about the foundation bases, and that you're just really drawn to them. And BC Rich's channel is in the chat there for anyone that like to go over there and sub, and videos are good, and there's more coming. So
yes.
But what is it about that foundation base that just kind of draws you in?
So what I did not know when I got it is, first of all, it has an incredibly slim neck. So you can really, really, really move around on it very quickly. It has there's 2 designs. The earlier ones, and I prefer them a little more than the laters. It has these 2 super ferrite single coil pickups. And the way they're designed, it's more happenstance than anything, but the bridge pickup is in the exact perfect position for where I like to anchor my thumb and play. And the pickup height is just perfect. It's basically like a natural bass ramp. So the ergonomics of it are just something that I really clicked with. It has a very peculiar fretboard radius. I have to look. I think it's an 8-inch radius, which is very uncommon for basses because it's different than a Fender. And most of the other PV basses, like I have a T40 because I want to be like Marley's Ghost. I want to drag that through eternity like that lead safe. And while I like the foundation, it's a traditional precision neck and radius, and it just feels different. So how slim the neck was, the positioning of the bridge pickup is just perfect. And the ferrite pickups are really great full range pickups. You can get a really good snappy tone, a tone that can cut really well, and you don't have to fiddle with it much. So I've always been kind of a PV loyalist for that reason. I've always had very good results with their stuff. So I love them.
So is the T40 basically the answer to the P bass? Is that PV's answer to the P bass?
PV wanted to make a bass that could do everything and a guitar. So that was the T40 and the T60. So there's not a lot that you can't do with one except make them light. They have, oh God, Ryan, they are. I still have one. They are not a light machine. So there's a million different tone combinations with them. You have this split circuit built into the controls of it. So once the controls pass a certain point, I think it's 4 or 5, it moves from 2 humbuckers to 2 single coils. Then there's an in phase, out of phase. So there's this entire chart you can download of the sounds you can get with a T40, presumably same thing with a T60. It's still the best bass I have for getting a Rickenbacker sound because you can do that with the in phase. The problem is I think they look a little awkward. I love mine, but they're kind of awkward looking. And I don't think most players needed all that. I think they are over-engineered. They're bulletproof. But I just think that, PV over-engineered it. And they made a bunch of them, but they're still undervalued, I think, for what they are. And they're just extraordinarily heavy. And I think it's the white ash body of them or whatever. The body woods are incredibly heavy. The bridges are huge. The tuners on those things are huge. They are just a load. I mean, they're fun, but they are a load. So that was the idea. The bass that could do everything. Not really asking if you need a bass that can do everything, if that makes sense.
No, that is true. Well, but you're so even though even though that T40 can do all that,
yeah,
you still prefer the foundation.
Yeah, they're just a faster playing bass. They really are. I had the 5-string version for a while, and it didn't really work well as a 5. It got very neck heavy, and the spacing was a little bit off. So eventually, my main 5-string, I have a hollow body 5-string fretless that's really superb. I'll do a video on that. It shows up in a couple of my videos. But my main 5-string is actually a PV Forum that I put a Foundation 5 neck on because it's hard getting a good budget. Yep, the T60 is ungodly heavy too. So, but they're just great instruments, and I bought way too many of them. Nobody needs. How many do I have? Let's see, there's 2 black ones. There's a white one. There's a natural finish one. I have 4 or 5 of them. So nobody needs that many. But I bought them all during COVID, which was a good time to buy basses from bass players that were not gigging. So,
well, and as you've been through them, have you found them to be pretty consistent with each other?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was the really interesting thing about PV because people kind of forget this, but they were the first ones to use CNC technology for guitar production, and they borrowed it from the military, essentially from firearms manufacturers who had to make these very precise tolerances essentially rifle stocks that were going to be used for free floating. I don't want to get too far on the firearms line, but for free floating barrels and the like. And Hartley was able to recognize that this could be applied to guitars. There's no reason why you couldn't make a guitar neck the same way. And they all are pretty identical. The super ferrite ones, the 3 that I have, all feel exactly the same. The second wave ones, I have one of those, and it feels a little different, but it plays so well. I kind of broke my rule. And they became the foundation, no pun intended, the foundation for a lot of the PVs. The PV Dynabase is a foundation with active electronics, with an active EQ system. The accelerator is basically an upgraded foundation. I have one of those too. It's an 18-volt enhanced foundation. So it was really their most useful bass until they made the Cirrus. And that Cirrus bass was phenomenal. I could never afford one, but that was their flagship. We make something almost as good as an Alembic at a quarter of the price back in the 90s and early 2000s. And they were phenomenal. They were just out of this world.
So I guess that Cirrus is that one that's still on your list then.
I guess they still make them, but they're the Chinese ones and the quality just is not there on them. The US ones are pretty pricey. And I've got, my Rob Allen Fretless 5 is probably a slightly better instrument. It did cost more too, but it would be hard to justify it without clearing out some of the herd. So I do. And the thing is, the older they get, the harder it is to find good examples of them. That's the other part. I'd been bidding on a few, but then the price was getting, near list, and I kind of backed away. But that's why I've been watching Sam Ash so closely. I'm praying that someone has a used Cirrus on there, because I'm one of the few people that loves Sam Ash used. I got some great stuff off them, some of which I've got sitting in the background here. So.
Well, and you feel free to show off anything you got there that you want to. So I know that you've got some pretty nice things in your collection, and you have some oddities as well.
Oddities is the thing, the misfit toys of the music world, and some guitar ones too. And let me see, I'll do one of my proudest Sam Ash acquisitions. This has been on a few different channels. I've not shown mine yet. But this is the type of thing that you can get off Sam Ash if you poke around their site. This monstrosity with the PV knobs still on it, the PV Mystic. I mean, look at this Spinal Tap nightmare. This was definitely drawn on a cocktail napkin when people were just way too drunk to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
And yet they made it. And to be honest with you, I got this from Sam Ash used for under $1,000 with its original case, which is just beat up, but the case is, case is the case. Still with these original over-engineered PV knobs that are impossible to get. And as weird as this thing looks, it plays phenomenally well. And it has some kind of weird proprietary PV weirdness tremolo system, but it works very well. I mean, even the stuff that they made that didn't hit, and Lord knows this and its stablemate, the Mantis, were not exactly commercial successes. Thank you, Michael. And the Razor, the hardest one to find. I'd love to find a Razor. Yes, Hobo Roadie, exactly. It was the 80s. I didn't want to imply that, but yep, that's kind of what I came up with, but it plays really well. And generic open blade. I think they're Bill Lawrence cloned pickups, I think, but sound really good. And that's the kind of stuff I like. Melted Starfish. Yeah, I'm thinking Melted Starfish. And the Mantis looks like the Carvin V220. If anybody remembers those Carvin Christmas catalogs you'd all get with Craig Shakiso from Starship.
It almost looks like they were starting with a traditional bass body, and it had the wood had a bunch of knots in it, and they just cut out all the knots.
It might be a wood recycling project. Yeah, maybe the entire PV, I don't know what they called it, what body lines they were, but it may have just been, yeah, we've got a lot of leftover wood. Let's just cut around it and see what we have. And certainly the razor, which is the hardest one to find of the three, it would, if you've ever seen a razor, it's like, yep, that's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, those knobs are impossible to get. Those knobs are so valuable. I always kind of pause when I think about selling one of my PVs because the knobs are like $40 each.
Oh yeah.
People.
Well, and and then it goes in that category of they don't make it like that anymore, and so when you come across them, you hoard them because you don't know when you're going to see them again.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Like I remember, I had this lunatic friend in high school for what god awful reason I don't know. He grabbed every 8-track player that somebody pulled out of their dash to put in a CD player, and it's like, what? He was just a weird dude. And then years later, found out he was making a flipping fortune selling these on eBay Motors to anybody doing a restoration job.
That's right.
Like, wow, well played, sir. Well played. So, but yeah, fun stuff.
Well, it's a matter of having that idea of what's going to be be popular next, right?
Yeah. And I just like good ideas that don't catch on. I mean, that has, when I was starting out, Bass Player Magazine didn't exist yet. So, thank you, Martian Murray. So Guitar Player was the only real magazine, and Guitar for the Practicing Musician. Wow. Oh, old Vox knobs. That sounds like a nightmare. Never mind. At least they made millions of PVs. Never mind a vintage Vox. So
yeah.
And that was the thing, Ryan Hall. The PV stuff was all American made, and it was all bulletproof. And you could get better tweaky, boutiquey stuff, but that stuff would break. Like all my bass rigs are solid state, and I never had a problem with them, and they were all rock solid. Like I was never a tube tone chaser, mainly because I was too weak to lift an Ampeg bass head. And if none of you have had the pleasure, I had friends who had them, they are like 89 pounds, and most of the weight is on one side, which is brilliant, just brilliant engineering. So, and then, can you imagine retubing that thing? I mean, even back then, tubes were like $58, $75. Hey, Michael. It's just, but I love that PV stuff. And I like things that don't quite catch on, because Guitar Player used to have Taisco Del Rey had I don't know what his real name is, but a session player had a column every month on weird guitars, and I was always fascinated by them, and that's kind of what inspired the channel, and that's kind of what I try to feature. Like there's things like, I'm a big headless bass fan. I won't pull out my headless God bass, the BC Rich. I'm saving that for the channel's big fiesta at some point, maybe for the holidays. But I mean, things like this is a Hohner clone of a Steinberger. And no one could afford a Steinberger in the 80s. They were so expensive. But Hohner made these great copies of them. And they were using, the licensed by EMG pickups, which are not as good as the real deal, but they're great basses. The active circuits in them are really good.
So is that little kickstand down below? Is that the make it sit better on your knee?
Yep. Oh, yeah. You need that. Yeah, you're not going to keep it on your leg any other way. It's a little more friction prone than a flying V, but not by much. But yeah, the little kickstand. And this is actually, I think the kickstand is actually better than the Steinberger, because the Steinberger had this weird plug-in looped kind of thing. And this just pops right out, So, I mean, the weird part is that was licensed by Steinberger too, but I didn't see that until they put it on their low-end models. And, stuff like that is just a lot of fun for me. Or let me see what else. Some of these have appeared on my channel, but some of them have not. But I think, let me just grab a couple more of the neater ones. I find all these. Oh, hey, Ferd, how are you, sir? I mean, this was the last video I shot on my channel. This was one of my ideas during COVID. It's a Illuminati aluminum neck bass with a graphite fretboard. And
I think I've watched that video 3 times now.
Really? I was fascinated by the idea because the one thing I did not like about the foundation basses, and I think the problem is it's a very slim neck, which is great for playing. But when I was out gigging a lot in the 90s, we'd have, like we do an afternoon for rock day at some fireman's carnival or something. So you'd play from 3 to 5 in sweltering July or August heat, go home, shower, grab a nap, and then do a gig that night at some air-conditioned club. And, you'd end up tweaking the neck pretty regularly at that point. And I remember, at that time, you could get the aluminum neck Kramer basses pretty cheaply because people hated them because of the way they feel. And they do feel, an aluminum neck does feel strange. And obviously the weight of them, even if they're, chambered a bit. But the fact is, people would say, well, they're aluminum and they warped. Well, they don't warp. I mean, you can't. Aluminum, they make aircraft out of aluminum. So they don't warp.
It's not going to warp, but you can bend it.
It expands. That's the problem. It's a very expandable wood, and that would screw up the tuning. So that's why I went with the graphite fretboard on this, because graphite, I played some graphite fretboard instruments back when the modulus basses were the schnizzle. That was what everybody wanted in the 90s. That and the Music Man 5. But I didn't like the way the graphite felt, but I knew it would make it stable. And that was sort of the whole point of this. So I did a video on that because I think I would like to think aluminum and graphite and all these instruments are having a bit of a moment now, and maybe they're not. So, but I'm sort of hoping.
It's funny that you bring up the modulus like that because I've never played a bass in my life and don't know much about the bass world itself. Only know a little bit about the PV basses just because I've seen enough of them, right? In my journey looking for other guitars. But it's that, I think that name of even us non-bass players recognize that name modulus, right? And that was the bass everybody wanted. It was, I don't know if this is our age growing up or what, right? But
well, that was the good thing about starting bass when I did too, because I remember, all the older guys, there really were only 3 basses. You had a P bass, you had a jazz bass, or if you were really on the edge, you'd have a Music Man. And there weren't many Music Man basses around because nobody was a Music Man dealer, So by the time the 80s rolled around, if you didn't want one of those 3, it feels like the 70s or early 80s, you bought an alembic. Well, nobody, even back then, alembics were like $4,000. So nobody was buying alembics. So yes, Michael is correct. You do need at least one.
And I am on the lookout for the right one. And
by one, we mean 2. So,
yes. By one, you mean 2.
Me too. But by the time I was starting in the 80s, all the boutique bass makers were starting out. Ken Smith, the high string is not an E.
So sorry.
So that is a good one. But you had Ken Smith coming out, and then the guy who founded Fodera, Vinny Fodera, left Ken Smith, started Fodera. So you had all these boutique basses, and even if you couldn't afford them, the stuff they were doing started trickling down to other basses, the active EQ, the active pickups, that, the 5 strings, all of that eventually made it down to price points where you could afford them. So it was a really good time to be learning bass. And you had, when I started out, it was all Jacko and Stanley Clark, which is great. But then you started getting the other guys coming in who were just as good, the Victor Wootens, the Marcus Millers. So you had the gear getting a lot better, the instruments getting better, and the players doing a lot of interesting things. So it was a good time to be learning, because if you could get half decent at any of those things, if you got half decent at thumb slapping or playing fretless, you'd always have a gig, because every guitar player is happy to slog off being the bass player. Oh, I can go back to rhythm guitar? Okay.
There you go. And so Vox Guitar Rocks has a question. He wants to know when Warwick basses debuted.
79, I think. They were a thing for a long time. They really hit their stride. They licensed the Ned Steinberger is sadly overlooked compared to Leo Fender. He invented so many great basses beyond the Steinberger. He designed the I'll have to talk to you, Ryan Hall, about that. I would like to try to tweak the neck a little bit without having to raise the nut, but that's where I am now. Shot ping treatment, no snapback straight. Aircraft. I bet you that's what they did. That sounds about right. But Warwick licensed the Kramer bass, the Ned Steinberger design. And I think Warwick did a lot of really good things with it. That's really where they found their niche. And then Warwick just had really, really, really deep pockets. I mean, they bought the Spectre bass design and they signed everybody. Every major bass player, I think, has a Warwick signature. I mean, so in addition to the Spectre bass, which was designed by Ned Steinberger, they've got the Adam Clayton Peanut from 311. Jack Bruce had one. Everybody had a signature Warwick. And I think they start showing up about 79 when Kramer stops making the Spectre bass. In the late 80s is when Warwick really steps in. And they've got everybody now, pretty much. And they make really good instruments.
So Time Surfing Alien says he's sorry he's late, but he didn't. He doesn't play bass, and but he has a Dylan 5-string from the 70s, as near as he can trace it.
There were some 5-strings very late in the 70s. It could be. There was one guy, a jazz player, who was kind of noted for having a 5. And I think that was like a custom alembic. Andy West from the Dregs, the Dixie Dregs, more known for Steve Morse being in the band, but Andy West was a great bass player too. I don't think he's dead. He had a 5, so you could. There were some oddball 5s being built in the 70s, so it's entirely possible. They don't really hit their stride until the 80s. But they were definitely out there. There were even 7-string guitars in the 70s. There was some, I can't think of his name, some jazz guy who was known for doing it, and everybody laughed at it. And then the Universe came out 10 years later, and Vi was a genius. And it's like, well, it's a drone string. He's more popular than this jazz guy, but it's been done. So.
And I was there was a bass video I was watching a couple years ago, and just as from memory. So, and it's a guy sitting around, and he's in his backyard, and he's sitting there talking about the difference between a 4-string bass and a 5-string bass. And he's like, "Look, all you young guys out there getting started, just stick with the 4. You don't need the 5. You don't know how to do it yet anyway." It's like kind of going back and forth. And I know there's that thing among bass players about whether you need to have a 4 or whether you need to have a 5. What is your philosophy on that?
So, and it is 2 opinions. I mean, it's weird. Either you can, I think it depends on how you can do the transition. Like either you can make the transition really easy, which I did to 5. I bought the P bass is the workhorse. I have some P bass clones. I have to admit, I don't like P basses. I don't like P basses. I don't like jazz basses just because I know it's sacrilege. Because consider when I started playing, in the mid 80s, that was the basement era of Fender. Fender was nightmarishly bad. And even though I didn't know much about them, like there was a very brief period where I thought, well, everybody plays a P bass. I should get one of those. And when I had the chance to play one at the store that I was considering taking lessons at, even though I didn't play, everything I own is American, so they're cush, man. So no, I'm an un-American little guy. PV, Rob Allen. So just about everything I have.
Go easy on them. Go easy on them.
But they weren't well built. I could tell that even, and it's just like, what is wrong with this? Doesn't feel right. And they're like, well, let's look at some others. And that's how I kind of settled on PV, and the slimmer neck helped too. But the 5-string thing, I love 5 strings. You don't have to retune. I had a video I bought a hip shot D tuner very early when I started playing because we were doing a lot of down tune stuff, and my ear was not good enough to drop D on the fly. I needed time to do that. That was a major task for me to retune. So I wasn't going to retune on the fly. So I bought a hip shot, and I used that thing for 40 years now almost. And the 5-string takes all that away. So I really do like it. I don't think you need it. I think probably the ironically enough, the best compromise is maybe something like this. I have it strung normally, but this is a Sandberg bass. They are another German bass builder. They are sadly in the shadow of Warwick, but they make great stuff. And this is what I use essentially instead of a Stingray, because I'm not a big Stingray fan for a few reasons. And this is actually their Rammstein signature. And this is BEAD. So it's a 5-string with the low B up here. I have it strung normally, but that's something players have been doing to get away from the issue of going from 4-string to 5. But I like the 5-string. I think, you can probably go your whole career without a 5. But it's fun. Why not stretch yourself a little? But there are people that are great players that cannot make that jump. Guys like Billy Sheehan. Billy Sheehan does not like playing a 5. He doesn't like the spacing of it, and the guy's a monster. So,
and I guess, and that's kind of like the whole guitarist thing, right? We all have our own preferences and the things we like and the things we don't like, right? And it's and I guess where you come in on that really is a big thing of how you get started, I guess.
Yeah, I think that really is it. I think starting with a 4, and if that's what you've done your whole career, moving to the 5. It's the same thing with fretless. I absolutely love fretless bass, and you can get just some great tones out of it, and they're just awesome to play, and they have a unique, very resonant character to them. But the average bass player is not going to need to do that, and it's the same thing. Getting really deep into popping and slapping. I like doing it, and I think it adds a lot to songs, but you don't need to be Marcus Miller level. And as much as I like Stu Hamm and Billy Sheehan, I have never spent a lot of time working on neck tapping because I know no one is ever going to ask me to do that. No one's ever going to say, hey, instead of the bass riff in Brown Eyed Girl, tap it. Why don't you do a tapped part in there? That's not going to happen. So, nor should it actually.
Okay, now I want you to brace yourself for this one.
Yeah, we need to talk. I have and in full, and I'll get all the other hatred out too. I also hate flat wounds, but I do have a P-bass clone that has flat wounds on it because the cult of James Jamerson requires that. So, and I do have one P-bass clone that I built that I actually like. P-basses are great to learn how to weld. That would be bad. Solder on because they're so simple. So I do have one P-bass clone I absolutely love. P&J pickups are a good mix. If you're looking for a good all-around bass, it's hard to beat something with a P&J setup. It really is. I have the low-end version of the Michael Anthony signature Yamaha. That's where my hip shot is. It's the one in my hip shot video. And that's an awesome bass, a PJ setup. And it's really, really versatile. But, the only P bass I really enjoy playing is one of my clones because I have it basically set up, if a P bass mated with a PV foundation. I put a fingerboard on it, a bass ramp. So it plays very much like my PV. So it's fun to play, but it took some tweaking. I had to put an EMG active pickup in it, and the bass ramp. All but one of my P basses have a bass ramp because I cannot get comfortable with that pickup and where it's positioned. I get too much fret slap and it feels too floppy.
So what is that for us non-bass players?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have brought an instrument up. So a bass ramp is literally just a piece of wood or plastic that fits underneath the section of the strings you're going to be plucking on. So and on my P basses, it sort of wraps around the P bass pickup. So when you're plucking the strings, there's a piece of wood underneath. Not your fingers aren't going all the way down. So it's a faster way of playing. Essentially, it's what my pickups do on my PV basses. So I wish I would have brought one up, but that's the idea. And you can find images of them online. Gary Willis from Tribal Tech, a brilliant bass player, he made them popular. All of his Ibanez signatures have them, but it's really a piece of wood or plastic that fits underneath the strings. And the idea is your fingers don't go down that far. They kind of bounce up pretty quick. And that's what my foundation basses do. Or even, so maybe I'll show you in the Steinberger. So when I play close to the bridge here. I rest my thumb on top of the pickup. Well, because I'm picking here with my fingers or plucking, my fingers can't go any lower than the pickup. Now a P bass, the pickup would be here and the area is kind of open. So your strings can go down, your fingers can go down past further than they normally would. So what the ramp does, the bass ramp, is a piece of wood or plastic that goes in this space. And it gives you sort of the same effect you get here. So that's the crux of it, if that makes sense. Bass players know this, and no one else cares because we're lonely. So, and there is such a thing as a bass tremolo, and they are horrible abominations. No one should ever. I was looking at JP Page's comment. No one should ever invest in a bass tremolo. They do silly stuff.
Well, Martian Murray has a good question. He's like, are there alternate tuning? Is there alternate tuning a thing for basses as well?
Yes, sometimes more by accident. I don't know why, but one time, I think because it got re-released, I was the slapping on bass. Sorry. Need to defend yourself. Yes, exactly. When Sweet Emotion came out as the Pandora's Box repackaged single from Aerosmith, a lot of bands ended up doing Sweet Emotion. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, I'm the only bass player on the planet that thought he tuned the G string up to A on that. So I learned that whole intro tuned up to A. So I've played around with alternate tunings. Billy Sheehan uses a lot of alternate tunings. He used to do, so the standard tuning for a bass from high to low is G, B, A, E, lower four strings on a guitar. For a while, what he was doing was essentially D, A, D, A. And that's very interesting because it makes it much easier to fret octaves instead of having to sort of do one string over 2 frets up. You're basically able to double stop in the same position. Your A is your A would be your 5th fret on your E string. And then your A is also, your 5th fret on your new string. So it definitely is a thing. It's not really appreciated by non-bass players much, just because, the nature of the instrument. Mark Egan, who studied under Jacko, he'll use alternate tunings, but it's not heard much outside of, sad, lonely bass players who like to listen to other sad, lonely bass players with Berkeley music degrees and, or went to the University of Miami. So, but, and not as ubiquitous. I can't think of a bass line that's like, see, this is an alternate tuning. Usually it's drop D or the like. So
it brings me to the next question then. How do you deal with all the bass player jokes?
I weep. I cry immediately. I weep and I curl in a ball and I twitch. That's my survival skill. I learned it from fainting goats. If you've ever seen a video of a fainting goat, when attacked by a predator, immediately fall over and twitch. It seems like a dubious. Or the alternate one was back when I was playing mainly in the Mid-Atlantic, most of the states, which are open carries. Like, remember, the bass player's the one with the gun. And I was usually the guy with the gun. So it's like, go stand out. Yeah, he's got his gun tonight. So put him on the put him on the truck when we're doing loadout. So it's like, yeah, the bass player's the guy who's got the gun. So that worked well too.
And Michael B. Live is got a great question. He says, do you play live with others for fun and experience? He finds that his choices of which bass rely on the changes based on fitting into the band setting versus what's more fun at home.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. If you're going to go out and just do sort of an open mic bass night, you're going to take a PJ bass of some type and kind of be stuck with that. I mean, not necessarily stuck with it, but I think that's what kind of folds in the mix. Like I'll get bored here and I'll sit here and, I'll bash around on my 8-string because I like it. It's kind of fun. And because I want to say, hey, I have an 8-string, even if, and you're not going to take that out. I mean, I think, thank you, Terry. But I think, you're really in a band setting. It's going to be depending on what you're playing now, obviously, like, I mean, the first band I ever played in, ironically, with I'd mentioned my late friend earlier, was an all, the stand-up bass, the upright bass is awful. That's the only instrument I can't play. Every few years I try to do that, and I'll borrow one or I'll sit in a store with one for an hour or two. And the string height, the fretboard, it is pure agony. I come out of there feeling flayed to death. So
that's not an easy back and forth thing.
No, I can't. People can do it. I can't. I mean, I love the playing, like the late Rob Wasserman, who was with Lou Reed. I'm not a big Grateful Dead fan, but he did a lot of work with Bob Ware. He played a 6-string Clevenger upright. I don't know how, but he played it brilliantly. And every so often I'll think I want to do this, and it's hard. That's why I bought a 5-string fretless so I can do upright. Same thing with 6-string bass. I can play a 5. Mm-hmm. I like the 5, love the 5. The narrow string spacing of the 6 combined with the extra width of the neck and the weight of having to fight that headstock, I can't do anything on a 6-string bass. It is just the only 6-string I have is my Squier bass 6, and that's its own little unique animal.
Yeah, all that spacing between your fingers changes, and it just the muscle memory's now not there, right?
Yeah, and it's just there's less. I mean, the neck is very wide. There's less spacing, and it's a very physically heavy instrument. So every few years, I'll sit down and maybe I'll get a 6. No, not doing that. Maybe I'll get an upright. Nope, not doing that either. And I had the same issue with flat wounds because they're very high tension compared to round wound bass strings. Mm-hmm. And I tended to try to play them just as hard as I played round wounds. And I'd be in a lot of pain. So I had to back off. Hello, Steve. I had to back off from that. But there's definitely is a divorce between playing at home, getting back to the question, playing at home and playing out and what you like playing. I mean, although we did pretty well when I was a gigging musician, my favorite band was the first band I ever played in, which was, and I kid you not, an all-instrumental rock trio with my late friend, the guitar virtuoso who was killed in Afghanistan. So we were a bunch of 20-year-olds doing like Mr. Scary, Rubina, Always With Me, Always With You, Ice Nine, all of these Satriani and Vai and George Lynch stuff, and that nobody came to see us other than other musicians. But for challenging stuff to play, that was fun. That was great to do that live.
Oh, for sure. So another reason not to get a stand-up race.
Well, you may make the bass your vehicle. I mean, there may be some way you could put some kind of a, like, I don't know how big the engine of a Prius is, but I'm sure there's a way you could sort of make that to the upright.
Ride the bass to the gig.
Yeah, maybe you ride the bass to the gig, and I'm sure that would qualify for HOV lanes. I mean, even for the commute to work, that might have value. So,
well, let's talk a little bit more of your bass gig, your bass gigging days, because that was kind of the reason why you went that way, right?
Yep.
And I think we kind of diverted from your story there that you were talking about your buddy there.
Yeah. I mean, and it was always easy to find a gig because there aren't that many. I'm not to the point where Glenn Fricker, who has a deep and abiding loathing for bass players, and there's a special ring in hell awaiting him for that. But I mean, most
How do you really feel?
Actually, I like Glenn a great deal. He's a lot of fun. Actually, I do enjoy him, and I don't get why people. Once again, people take this stuff way too seriously. It's like, oh, are you to question bass players?
Yeah, it's for him. It's part of the shtick.
It's entertainment. Yeah, it's professional wrestling as a sound engineer, but he knows what he's doing. I mean, the guy knows, what he's doing. So I find him funny. But yeah, I was always able to find a gig, and that was really helpful. I was playing at the height of the grunge era in the 90s, which I really loved because people were coming out to actually hear bands, and that was really nice, and it was really a good time to be playing because music had kind of a little bit of a renaissance then. I mean, it had gotten so kind of weirdly, shiny and polished. And I thought that, it was like the old, someone was saying, even if you hated Nirvana were important because it put people back on stage that looked like you and didn't look like rock stars. You didn't have to look like Spinal Tap or try to look like Spinal Tap to get a gig. And, that was a lot of fun. And, just being able to do a few things on bass makes you really marketable as a musician. I mean, I can play pick style. I'm not Steve Swallow, who's this, jazz virtuoso bass player who picks, but I could always drive a song with a pick if the song needed a pick. I could always thumb slap. I'm not going to do Marcus Miller, but I'm pretty decent at it. So nothing's going to come down the pike I can't do, and it always worked out really well for me. I mean, the only thing I could not do is sing. Ironically, now that I'm playing a lot more guitar than bass, my singing's getting a lot better just because the chord voicings follow the vocals much more than the bass, which is why to the end of time, I will never figure out, and it's true, he says it, but, Geddy Lee maintains the secret to his success is that his bass lines always follow the vocals. No, they don't. I do not know they do not. Geddy Lee may think so, but I look at this stuff and it's like there's nothing in common between the bass line and what he's singing. But it makes perfect sense to him. But that was my path. So I did that between college and graduate school. Then when I was in graduate school, I played with a few bands, and then got into the professional world, but always kept playing. As I don't know who it was, Michael in the chat earlier, if I'm just playing bass and guitar in my bedroom, I'll always do it because it's just what I love. It's just such a big part of me.
So I've got to show this one before it gets old.
I remember we talked about this once, myself and I had a friend in high school who was a huge Rush fan. And we would talk about how the fact that Geddy Lee had some weird inner pendulum or metronome that no one else was following. Like we watched back when everybody was doing a tribute and fundraiser video, there was a Canadian one too. It was like the Canadian version of We Are the World. So Triumph was there, Geddy Lee was there, like all these Canadian acts. I remember watching the video for it, and it's like, and Geddy Lee's head is moving to its own unique rhythm that nobody else in the chorus. And I remember talking to my friend Joe. I said, look, even here. I said, he's hearing something completely different than everybody else there. They're all wearing the same headphones. They're all listening to the same song. Why is his head moving that way? So there's definitely something weird there.
That's hilarious. Well, Michael B. Live has Michael B. Help actually has a good question here. Do you have a favorite bass teacher? And he recommends Jonathan Stoyanhoff.
So I'm not familiar with him. As far as a good theory book, I actually use one that Chuck Rainey put together. I like Jeff Berlin's work a lot too. Jeff Berlin gets kind of a bad rap, but he's got some really good stuff, and he's a brilliant player. It's like if you can hold your own on stage against Jocko, yeah, you're pretty good. I like Jeff Berlin's stuff, and actually for exercises, I use I wish I could grab it here. There's a very famous cello study book that Jocko used at the University of Miami Thank you, Ben. That's it. All I knew was Northern Lights. I didn't know what the song was called, but I remember it was Northern Lights. Yes. There's a very famous cello exercise book that Jacko used at the University of Miami back when he had a teaching gig there. And he was teaching. Mark Egan was there, Will Lee, because Will Lee's dad ran the program there. And I find that really useful too. I must admit, I'm a little bit out of step on guitar teachers, but mainly there's a very good method book that Chuck Rainey put together that I use. The Jeff Berlin stuff I really like a lot. He's got a lot of great videos and he's very knowledgeable about applying stuff. John Patitucci has some really good ones too. I stick to his 4-string stuff because I can't play 6, and he's known for his 6-string playing. And like I said, this is a very famous cello study book from I think it's the early 19th century. You'll find it. It's like cello etudes something. So that's what I tend to work with.
And Michael B. Live, Michael B. Help. I'm still so in Michael B. Live world in my head, but he's just cool. Jonathan is a personal virtual.
Gotcha. There are some great guys out there doing that's one of the legacies, I think, of COVID. There are some great players that are doing those types of lessons, and you can learn a lot. And at some point I should go back and more formalize what I'm doing in some areas.
So do you have a favorite song to play on bass?
Probably, it's not his most intricate song. I mean, probably the most intricate thing Jacko ever did was his adaptation of Bach's Chromatic Fantasy. But my favorite one to this day, and the only time I ever begged the spotlight to do a bass solo, was playing this. I think Jaco Pastorius's America is probably my favorite. It is note for note perfect. Everything with that song just fits so well together. I think it's on his album Invitation. And, there's better pinched harmonics in a lot of their songs. Birdland has better pinched harmonics. Chromatic Fantasy is more of a virtuoso piece. But America is just note for note perfect. And I still play it to this day, and I just love it. Everything works well on that song. And no one but other bass players have ever heard of it. So I don't know how many people are in the chat, but I know only 4 of them will know what I'm talking about.
That's funny. Well, Terry 3G says that makes him wonder, are there as many bass player teachers out there as guitar teachers?
Oh, no way. No way. My teacher was a guitar teacher who taught all my friends. And he's like, and who needed a paycheck. He's like, yeah, I'll teach bass. And was helpful. Like I learned, he taught me, Jacko did a version of Blackbird by the Beatles. And because he knew the guitar parts on acoustic, he was able to help me with that. But when it comes to the more bass-centric techniques, like I wanted him to teach me pinched harmonics, and he didn't know how to do that. And this is before YouTube, I had to find 2 older guys in literally 2 seedy looking older guys at the music store who showed me how to do that. So I think if you're starting out, you can learn the fundamentals from a guitar teacher. But if you really want to get into the nuances of the instrument that really make it rewarding, at least for me, you need a dedicated bass teacher. And they are not as easy to find, but they are out there.
You might have to look in some strange places, huh?
Look at some. I thought the van down by the bus station was a weird, but okay. I needed to learn how to play those. So, but yeah, there are not as many teachers now, sadly. So
and when you're looking at the bass and trying to decide if you're going to get it right, and you got it in your hand, is there like a go-to riff that you run it through its paces to see if this is going to do what you want it to do?
A lot of double stops. I want to do a lot of double stops, and I want to do a lot of octave double stops. And if I can motor around on the instrument that way, I'll feel pretty happy with it. Because you can do like a galloping 16th note Steve Harris thing on most basses, if you just know how to do it. But that's really what I look for. Like, can I get half decent, double stop voicings out of it? And it has sort of a good, And it's hard to tell because obviously the wood resonance versus what comes out of the amp are totally different things. But that's what I'm interested in. You know, do I feel like basically my head's going to my hands and my hands are going to the bass? Is that all working, or is it kind of forced? And, you know, with jazz basses, I owned one, and I bought it from CME, and it's still on CME's site. I sold it back to them a year ago, and it's still there. So nobody seems to like that bass. Like, I'm going to Chicago in August. I'm going to go visit it.
See how it's doing.
See how it's doing. I can't do that with a jazz bass. I can't do that with, with a P bass. So I need a pickup near the bridge. I need that bridge pickup not to move, not to bounce, which is what the music men do. But if I can, do some good double stops and do some good sort of just some good octave runs, I'm pretty happy with it. And basses are so much better than they used to be. It's really hard to get a bad bass, especially on the used market, if you just stick with Schecter or Yamaha. I mean, they make great stuff. It's hard to beat it. I'm a big American backer, but, the Schecter import stuff, the ESP LTDs, they're great gear. They really are.
Excellent. All right, one more question, and we're going to make room for Laz, who's coming up next.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I didn't want to dump into Laz's, but sure, go right ahead.
No, that's okay. That is fine. It happened. He usually starts about 5 minutes late, so we're okay. I'll be good. All right, so are bass players as excited about modding their basses as guitars tend to be?
No. Nope. This is just there's not as much gear to mod. And what are you modding? I'm going from a passive P bass pickup to an active P bass pickup. Okay, where are you going to put the battery? There's much less of a mod culture with basses. There really just is. And maybe your mileage may vary. There may be people in the chat who are like, no, I'm on this whole subreddit where all we're doing is chainsawing basses. But nope, all the mods I've done have been to my guitars. My basses are pretty pristine. So, because just don't need it. So my favorite all-time amp, I'm going to do a video on this. My favorite all-time amp, I had an acoustic 360. The acoustic 360 is about the size of a Volkswagen microbus, but Jocko played one, Phil Lynott played one, John Paul Jones. I sold it in grad school, and I have a very nice rack mount acoustic 360 emulator that I'm going to do a video on that I think comes close. Most of my amps are either Carvins or PV solid state from the Mark series. The Mark 6 is the one I like. And I've got some of the smaller PV combos from the T series, the 15-inch TKO I like, and the 112 12-inch T112 I like as well. I use that on my demos a lot.
All right. Well, there you have it. Rob, you've been an absolutely great guest. I really, truly appreciate you coming on in and doing it. It has been a real joy for me. And again, we've gone ahead. We've put your channel down here.
Thank you.
We've been dropping that throughout the whole thing. So I really appreciate you coming and doing it. One of the things that the rest of the chat may not know, but BC Rich was one of the first guys I started talking back and forth in all the chats with.
Yes. Yeah. Early and often. And I was one of Ben's early members. And there's Clyde. Clyde's coming to say hello. Dave's World of Fun Stuff taught me how to fix basses. And I got a suggestion for Ben. It was literally like, if you like Canadian guitar guys, you might like this channel. And that's how Charles and I met.
Mm-hmm. And so it's been a pleasure. I've been wanting to get you on and do this for a while, and I think this worked out pretty well.
I'm very happy.
So if you have not been over to check out BC Rich's channel, go over there, give him a sub. He's got more content. It is going to be starting to come out pretty soon. And so it's always a great time. So everybody have a great day. Go ahead and go on over to Laz. He's got his show starting up here, his music therapy show. And later on, we've got Ryan and the OU812 crew with their Sunday jam. And of course, tonight on Ben Coombs' channel, we have Unfucking Believable and Symmetry on with him. So make sure you go ahead and do that. All right. So, Rob, you hang in for a little bit and we'll talk.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone. Happy Cinco de Mayo.
There you go.